Donald Trump is not trying to win the national popular vote, it would seem. I'm not convinced he even cares, considering places like California and New York have massive populations that are going to vote for the Democrat no matter what. Donald Trump is trying to win the key areas of swing states that will give him those swing states in the Electoral College. Now, all of this is operating under the assumption that mail-in voting won't disrupt the election, and who knows what's going to happen. But let's just say the election goes as normal. How will Donald Trump win? And why is it the Democrats may have already lost the election? It's because the Black Lives Matter protests quickly became riots. And it turns out the people who live in suburbs do not like riots, particularly white suburban women with college degrees. They're growing increasingly frustrated with the ongoing unrest in urban centers. But of course, the polls have come out suggesting that Joe Biden is still winning. Well, it's true at the national level, but what about in suburbs? Actually, in suburbs, many pollsters are claiming that Joe Biden is still beating Trump. And this, to me, says the polls are wrong. I think this may be the best evidence the polls are wrong, because Joe Biden got out of his basement, went running full speed to address all of these riot concerns to the best of his ability without actually naming Antifa or Black Lives Matter, and then quickly tried changing the subject. That is not the behavior of someone who thinks they're winning. That's the behavior of someone who thinks they're losing, and many people have pointed it out. In Joe Biden's internal polls, they probably realized Trump's going to win the suburbs. This could be it for us. Net support for Black Lives Matter has been cut in half since the escalation of the riots. Now, mind you, that's because the support doubled when the George Floyd incident happened. Many people came out and said, we support this movement for justice. And then once it became mass riots, many people were like, yo, I'm out of here. And they wiped away basically the entirety of their gains supporting Black Lives Matter. They should have disavowed the riots and Black Lives Matter immediately once things got out of hand. Still to this day, they can't do it. Now, if we're going to operate under the assumption that polls are correct, things look great for Joe Biden. But I don't think that's the case. When we take a look at, say, Colin Kaepernick, guess what? Nobody wanted to sign him. I kid you not. I got the story. NBA ratings are way down. And guess what? A plurality of former NBA fans say the politics are just too much. People are getting sick and tired of this, notably in the suburbs, in which case the Democrats made a bet that following the George Floyd incident, mass support for Black Lives Matter would get them the votes they needed to win. It's long been shown by many polls that Trump is doing really well among the black community, getting him enough votes to guarantee his victory. Democrats know they need to win back these votes, so Joe Biden has started doing outreach. They thought maybe Black Lives Matter would be a path to that victory, and it's backfiring. And guess what? Interestingly, when we see the NBA and the NFL and people just rejecting this far left ideology outright, Donald Trump stepped it up, banning critical race theory from the federal government. He wouldn't be doing this unless he thought it would be benefiting him. And Joe Biden wouldn't be running to these jurisdictions scared and making statements unless his polls show he's suffering. And Joe Biden desperately trying to change the subject, and the media trying to help him, says to me, their support for Black Lives Matter may have already cost them this election because the riots are only getting worse. And of course, they're going to continue getting worse. In my earlier segment this morning, I referenced Sean Parnell. He's a Republican running in Pittsburgh. And he pointed out early on in an ad that these riots are going to get bad. And guess what? Local media criticized him for it. And then just the other day, Black Lives Matter harassed people at a restaurant, smashing glasses and stealing drinks. And that's just the beginning. It's not the biggest deal in the world relative to what we've seen already, but it will get worse. And I assure you, many of these people are going to say enough of this. Some speculate, however, based on these polls, some of these people will gravitate towards Joe Biden. I don't buy it. I absolutely do not buy it. But maybe some people, because I'll tell you this, in my neighborhood, to my shock, a Blue Lives Matter flag was taken down and the next door neighbor put up a Biden sign, the first Biden sign I've ever seen. And I live in the suburbs. This is the first experience I've ever had with seeing a Biden sign and someone taking down a flag. I didn't believe it was as widespread as some people suggested, and I still don't. Because in my neighborhood, for the most part, people seem to be kind of on the fence. But I guess we'll see how it plays out. Let's do this. Let's read what Politico has to say. And then I want to show you how Black Lives Matter has changed and how people are reacting to Black Lives Matter in general public outside of politics. Because mind you, if people won't watch the NBA and nobody wants to sign Kaepernick, we are seeing get woke, go broke happen in real time. Why would that not be the same case politically? Check out this story from Politico. Why Biden could still lose the suburbs to Trump. And keep in mind, that's exactly where Trump needs to win in order to win the Electoral College. Before we get started, however, head over to timcast.com/donate. If you'd like to support my work, there are many ways you can give. There's a P.O. box. The best thing you can do is share this video, however. I don't have a big marketing department. I just have word of mouth. So if you think what I'm talking about is important, and if you think people should know this, share this video to help spread the word. And don't forget, like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Let's read the story. Politico says, among local party officials, there's an undercurrent of uneasiness about how quickly the president shifted the focus of the campaign away from his coronavirus response and toward public safety. Politico says a raft of recent polls suggests Donald Trump's law and order rhetoric, amplified by the Republican National Convention and turmoil in Kenosha, Wisconsin, is doing little to cut into Joe Biden's lead. Now, before I read what they say, I have to point out what I said earlier with some commentary from another journalist. Yashir Ali tweeted, whether people think this is the right strategy or not, or whether the criticism is fair or not, Biden would not be doing this if the polls and focus groups didn't show that this is a weak spot for him. And this is a reference to Joe Biden running a week-long massive ad campaign, $45 million, condemning rioters and looters. Of course, Joe Biden won't call out the far left, Antifa or Black Lives Matter by name, but he needs to address the rioting and looting. To be fair, Joe Biden may still be leading in the polls, and he may just be shoring up his defenses to make sure Trump can't get any inroads. But I don't think so. I mean, Joe Biden said he wouldn't go to Kenosha and then changed his mind and rushed out there full speed. Yashir says it's a weak spot for him, and it may just be that, a weak spot where he's still doing better. I don't think so. I think Donald Trump is the law and order candidate in this regard. And from what I've seen and heard, many people have told me explicitly before the riots, they were for Biden or hated Trump, and now they're definitely for Trump. Another issue on a side note is that a lot of people I talk to who live in suburbs and rural areas, human trafficking is their number one issue. I don't know if that's just people I know, but I see people I never thought possible, like who would, to get political, are coming out and saying, like, look at all of these arrests that have been made when it comes to trafficking. And that's huge. But let's see what they say. Politico says, in swing state suburbs, local party officials are meeting the Labor Day start of the fall campaign with an undercurrent of uneasiness about how quickly Trump shifted the focus of the campaign to public safety. Interviews with more than 24 Democratic Party officials and strategists in the suburbs reflect confidence in Biden's ability to compete with Trump on issues surrounding this summer's civil unrest, but also widespread concerns about the political volatility and potential allure of the president's law and order message. In Pinal County, Arizona, where thin blue line flags have proliferated outside Phoenix and Tucson, Holly Lyon, chair of the local Democratic Party, said, quote, there is that little sort of unsettled feeling in people because we can tell that Trump's messaging is grabbing hold and it's working. How this plays out in the election, that's where people are all over the map, said Joseph Foster, chairman of the Democratic Party in Montgomery County, PA, in the Philadelphia suburbs. No one seems to know what that's going to entail or how people are going to react. Now, I live in the Philadelphia suburbs, but I'm not in the right state. I'm on the Jersey side of the river. Most people don't know this, but New Jersey is basically a collection of other states' metropolitan areas. So you've got Philadelphia, the river, and then Jersey. I'm on the Jersey side. My vote doesn't matter. Because Pennsylvania is a swing state and, I'm in a deep blue state. But I think based on what I'm seeing, I would not be surprised if Pennsylvania votes for Donald Trump. However, I did mention nearby, I was shocked to see a Blue Lives Matter flag taken down. Maybe someone stole it. I don't know. But it's been there forever and now it's gone. And then just next to it on the neighbor's house is a Biden 2020 sign. That to me was kind of weird because I've never seen that before, especially in this neighborhood. In my neighborhood, there's like this lake area. It's like a swampy marsh. You don't go in there. Someone somehow planted a massive Trump flag right in the middle. And this is a major blue district. It's like D+8 or something. They say the suburbs where Trump defeated Hillary Clinton by 4 points in 2016 and where the 2020 election will likely be decided have been a point of extreme weakness for Trump since the midterm elections, when voters 2 years ago recoiled from the president and the Republican Party, handing Democrats the House majority. In an effort to draw those voters back to him, Trump seized on images of looting and violence in Minneapolis and Portland following the death of George Floyd, and most recently Kenosha. Trump blamed the unrest on permissive Democrats and warned a Biden administration would leave suburban America in ruins. And I am in agreement. And it's not having to do with anything Trump said. It has to do with my tracking this stuff since it started. My beat before doing commentary in politics, I was on the ground covering civil unrest here in the United States, in Europe, and in and Egypt and North Africa. I've been to many of these places, South America, Turkey, Thailand. I've been all over. And I have seen how this stuff plays out and what it leads to. And I do not like it. And I needed just one Democrat to say, hey, Antifa, knock it off. And said, what do we get? Antifa is a myth. It's not true. There's no Antifa. Antifa is not real. But it is real. And I watch these videos. And I've been physically attacked by these people. So maybe I'm biased in that regard. But I want to see it dealt with. The Democrats refused. And Trump consistently held his ground. That's why I think whether or not they realize it, Trump's silent voters may actually be coming out. They go to mention that there's a bunch of polling showing that Joe Biden is still doing a lot better, saying that, no one's. Here's what Biden said of Trump's law and order posturing. Quote, they ain't buying it. And most Democratic political professionals and some Republicans believe that's probably true. Frank Luntz, the veteran Republican consultant and pollster, he said that Trump's talking about the right issue, but in the wrong way. Suburban voters want public safety, even more than law and order. They want safe streets rather than dominating the streets. His rhetoric is over-caffeinated. Kevin Farmer, chair of the Democratic Party in Forsyth County, North Carolina, said of Trump, I just don't think anybody reasonable is going to listen to that and think that's on the level. But 2 months before Election Day, there is an awareness the final verdict isn't in. And unlike on the coronavirus, unequivocally a losing issue for the president, many rank and file Democrats in the suburbs see a potential upside for Trump on the issue of law and order. If you thought things were bad today, well, just wait a few more days, a few more weeks, and a few more months. The far left isn't letting up. They don't care for Joe Biden to win. And some have even suggested they're scared that if Biden wins, they'll be marginalized and no one will care anymore. The traditional liberals will go back to sleep because their old, Democrat blue man has won. And it's only because of Trump and the rage from the media that there are people in the street at all. The far left anti-capitalist types, the communist types, will go out and protest, but will Black Lives Matter individuals? Maybe, but not nearly as much, so it's suggested. Now, in my opinion, the fact that they're still rioting, even though it's hurting Joe Biden, says to me, if Joe Biden gets elected, he will either cave to them and give them whatever they want, or it will only get worse because now you will have no federal authority to stop them. To the best of their ability, it would seem the feds have actually been charging these people and arresting them from New York to Portland. Federal deputization of Oregon State Police is dealing with the issue without sending in federal authorities, and it's very clever. Would Joe Biden do that? In my opinion, the answer is no. One way we can tell that the riots have backfired and may have already helped Trump is over at Civics, looking at a poll of 160,000 people. Take a look at this. Early on, before George Floyd, we can see on May 17th, 16% net support among all registered voters. Keep that in mind, 16%. George Floyd happened, and it hit 25. The Democrats saw something and said, capitalize. Unfortunately, they're now down to 12% net support. That's right. That is right. Because of the riots, net support for Black Lives Matter is lower now than before George Floyd. That to me says something powerful. The riots have destroyed gains that the left had made before the George Floyd incident. And that is why I say riots do not work. And that is why I tell people, left or right, do not go out, do not engage in violence, do not attack people. Let law enforcement deal with this. You can peacefully protest. You can engage in civil disobedience. But engaging, with other factions, fighting with them, it is bad across the board. And particularly for the right, because it will be framed against you no matter what you do. Never interrupt your opponent when they're making a mistake. So these riots are unleashed. And it's shocking to me that support for Black Lives Matter was at 17% on May 25th. And now it's at 12%. George Floyd, initially a boon, the riots destroyed that, taking away 5 percentage points of support. That's crazy to me. Absolutely crazy. Now, since the Jacob Blake incident, they went from 11% to 12%, so there's a little uptick. But they halved their support from the peak, more than half, and they've actually caused a net loss. Remarkable. What that means is that Democrats' embracing of Black Lives Matter is a net negative for them. They jumped on board with this after the George Floyd incident, and now they're negative to where they were. Among independent voters, it's even worse. We can see that independent voters, 27% supported Black Lives Matter. And there was around 14% support before George Floyd. Well, thanks to the riots, it is now at 11% among independent voters. It dropped down to about 9% just before Jacob Blake, and then afterwards up to 11. But a little bit worse. A little bit worse. That's the backfire on the Democrats, 100%. And they know it. And I think this shows how the polls are bad. But here's what I want to do. First, I want to show you this reaction, which is hilarious. MIT Technology Review claims the riots are the result of right-wing individuals covering the stories. Okay, no one is making these people go out and do this. You can't blame Andy Ngo and Elijah Schaffer for this. But let me show you how people are really reacting on the ground to all of this far-left absurdity. You may have seen the story. I covered it last night. 38% of sports fans say the NBA is too political as the reason they are watching less. Remarkable. The ratings for the NBA are down. In one instance, around 40%, but overall around 27%. And the plurality of those polled said the league has become too political, the clear choice, with 38% of respondents. And 19% said because of the NBA's association with China. Wow. I mean, that just shows straight up something's resonating among people as it pertains to Donald Trump's rhetoric. Black Lives Matter, we don't like it. China is bad. Yet the Democrats have either ignored and downplayed China or outright supported Black Lives Matter. Now, here's a story that I find to be the most fascinating. This shows that not only do they not like the rhetoric of Black Lives Matter, but the riots specifically and the calls to defund the police have triggered people who work within these companies to stand up and say no. Check this out. American Airlines faces boycott after allowing cabin crew to wear Black Lives Matter pins on uniforms. Furious staff and passengers claim move is anti-cop, racist, and anti-American. Now, this to me is very interesting. Employees of American Airlines saying things like, my husband works in law enforcement and I am offended by this. Let's read. They say in a company-wide statement, introducing the new policy American Airlines wrote, clearly we live in a time where it is so important to have a dialogue about this important issue of racism in our society and try to find common ground. The airline, is truly committed to having an inclusive culture that is welcoming to all and a reflection of our country and world. This is why American is so committed to creating a more tolerant and diverse team. They go on to mention that essentially people can wear lapel pins that say Black Lives Matter. But the move has sparked a backlash, with one veteran flight attendant writing to American Airlines complaining. In an email obtained by the New York Post, it read, I take offense to this, serious offense. My husband is a law enforcement officer, and as was my deceased father. And as far as I'm concerned, all lives matter. I am completely disgusted at the fact that we can't show support for our God and country, our LEOs. But when it comes to Black Lives Matter organization, which is controversial in itself, American Airlines says that's obviously different, she wrote, and we can. How is that right? Well, I don't feel included. A second flight attendant who spoke to Fox News vowed to start wearing a badge in support of President Donald Trump on duty if others are permitted to wear BLM pins. The backlash of the new policy has also spread among American Airlines passengers. Now, I'm not super concerned about the passengers themselves because conservatives speak up periodically. I mean, I remember when the Colin Kaepernick thing happened and they burned a bunch of their gear. I thought it was silly. But speaking up is still an important thing. What I find fascinating here is that they're risking losing their jobs. That's what I've said for quite some time. If you oppose this stuff, if you're on the right, if you're conservative and this stuff worries you, you have to speak up against it. Now, American Airlines said, no, you can't wear whatever you want because Black Lives Matter is not a political statement. It is, of course. It is an Act Blue funded organization. I believe the parent organization, the nonprofit, is called Thousand Currents, and they receive donations through the Democrats' donation portal, Act Blue. Clearly, it is political, and they are lying maybe to get around some kind of federal tax requirements, or as an excuse to allow it while denying other people the same rights. But I'll tell you something. Seeing these flight attendants stand up is really interesting, because it seems like you have women and men, this woman clearly saying her husband is in law enforcement, who are not happy with this. And that's a demographic the Democrats rely on. Women overwhelmingly support Black Lives Matter and men oppose it. Isn't that interesting? But take a look at this. Two Democratic strategists, this is from Politico again, who recently viewed focus groups of suburban voters described high-propensity voters increasingly concerned about unrest in urban centers, though both strategists said it was unclear whether that concern would push them to Biden or to Trump. One of the strategists described a focus group in which white, college-educated women reacted to the protests by discussing their own property values, and in one woman's case, her family's mortgage. Quote, "White women who have college degrees are starting to get really sick of this," the strategist said. Now, why is that so important? Let me bring you back to civics. And first, let's choose females. Their support for Black Lives Matter was around 30% before George Floyd, hit 37 and dropped to 25. It is about double the national average among independents. But let's say college graduate females. Among college graduate females, it goes down even more, 22%. That to me is surprising. And it was 27% before. These are well, actually, you know what? Let's throw in postgraduate as well. It's even higher. These are women who are helping the Democrats win, getting fed up with Black Lives Matter. Now, I guess it'd be fair to say that it doesn't really matter if it's a college-educated woman or anyone else. We can see the Democrats and Black Lives Matter have wiped out their gains because of the riots, a huge net detriment to the movement, probably to their fundraising, and absolutely to local politicians. But to see it in the suburbs is particularly important. That's where Trump needs to win. Politico goes on to say, if civil unrest persists, said Robert Tatterson, secretary of the Democratic Party of Ozaukee County outside Milwaukee, Trump, quote, will be able to be the strong man, only I can save you leader, and that's playing out just like I had feared. The plus side is that it's activating the Democrats, Tatterson said. It's activated people on both sides. I don't know where the pendulum has swung, who has more people that were sitting on the sidelines who weren't maybe going to vote, who are going to vote now, or who were in the middle and has swayed, I don't know. Considering that the Democrats have lost their gains, or that Black Lives Matter has lost their gains just before the George Floyd riots, it stands to reason that is a net detriment to them, and the pendulum is swinging for Donald Trump. That's the main point I want to take away from all this. We'll remove any of these prerequisites and just look straight at, do you support or oppose the Black Lives Matter movement? And before George Floyd, 17%, and now it's at 12%. That's all that matters. You want to know who is seeing the hard gains from this? It is Donald Trump. Now, the support for Black Lives Matter was going up for some time, and it crossed over into net support around 2018 in February. And since then, it has steadily increased. This is great news for Democrats. But will they win off of it? I don't think so. Because while we're seeing support for Black Lives Matter, and while Black Lives Matter is wildly popular among Black voters, Trump is still seeing massive gains among Black voters. So he may win some urban pockets, and he may be taking suburban areas. And that's why Joe Biden probably panicked and fled. We can see it in sports, and we can see it in jobs. Conservatives starting to stand up and push back. But I don't know what will happen because of mail-in voting, like I said very early on in the segment, and it may all just be meaningless. But let me end by saying one thing. Some people have pointed out maybe the Democrats' strategy is that they'll jam up the presidential election so that Nancy Pelosi will become president, interim president, until the election gets cleared up. Well, that's assuming the Democrats take the House. If the House elections finish with Republicans regaining majority, then it will not be Nancy Pelosi as speaker, will it? In which case, it could be a Republican. All in all, I'll tell you what, there's no way that I'm looking at these polls and seeing this, and Joe Biden is not. I am convinced they realized they lost their gains with Black Lives Matter because of the riots, and that's why Biden is panicking. And that's why I don't think these polls make sense. The ones that are saying Biden is still winning in the suburbs. Maybe he is. And maybe Biden was just trying to stop Trump from taking the lead. I'd be willing to bet, however, that Trump's secret voters, fears of cancel culture, and anger over the riots have pushed Trump over the edge. And even Democrats are starting to feel like Trump's going to win. Just wait until the debates happen. I would be shocked if they do, to be completely honest. There's no way. Biden is going to get roasted hard. It's going to be funny, and it's going to be sad. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 6 p.m. over at youtube.com/TimCastNews. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you all then.